Hello and good morning again. Welcome to the webinar Shaping Tomorrow's Landscapes, Land Use Futures in the Danube-Carpathian region. My name is Hildegard Meyer and I work at WWF Central and Eastern Europe. I'm based in Vienna. WWF Central and Eastern Europe is a partner in the Natura Connect project, coordinating the Danube-Carpathian case study region. We have today technical support from Eurobug Federation, Marit Schnepf, who will take care of the chat, and Sandra Grego, who does the technical magic in the background. Before we start the presentations, I would like to introduce you to some basic rules for today's webinar. So as you have already noticed, the webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions, please write your questions and comments in the chat, indicating the speaker you address. Or today, because we are not too many people, you can also raise your hand and I give you the floor for your question to address the respective speaker. All presentations, the recording and kind of small report will be available at the Natura Connect EU past events and shared with registered participants. So all will be available for later use or for sharing with other interested people who might not have time today. And then also feel free to rename and state your organization next to your picture by clicking on the three dots next to your name. And yeah, please start and stop your camera at your convenience. So why are we here today? We will discuss land use changes in the Danube-Carpathian region and its implications. We will get an impression of how the region might change, assuming certain socio-economic factors, for example, demand for crops or forestry, and also including demography. The project and we will project what landscapes in the future will look like across Europe. And today, especially, we will have a focus on the Danube-Carpathian region. And this creates a map of land cover and land use for all of Europe, including within the 30% protected areas and restored areas, and also outside of those top priority areas in the light of the European Union Biodiversity Strategy and the establishment of the Trans-European Nature Network. We will explore today's land use decisions, how they shape the Danube-Carpathian region in the coming decades. And we will dive into different land use scenarios, including the underlying data assumptions and storylines behind them. And these different scenarios are based on the concept of nature futures frameworks, which you will hear about by our speaker, Camille Vignier-Cambron. And the session will conclude with a discussion on the purpose and practical use of scenarios for stakeholders, helping define landscape visions, clarify trade-offs, and inspire more targeted strategic planning. I invite you to actively take part in this thought experiment and exchange your knowledge and wisdom with us. So the agenda is that I will first start with a short introduction to Natura Connect. Perhaps not all of you have already heard or came across this project where this webinar is part of. Then Harald Egerer from the Secretariat of the Carpathian Convention will speak some welcome notes and talk about the key challenges of land use changes in the Danube-Carpathian region. After that, we will have a presentation by Camille about the land use changes under positive future scenarios, a deep dive into scenarios development, followed by an interactive check-in on different values of nature and regional challenges, plus a discussion. And of course, somewhere there will be the seminar closed. So I'm starting with this brief introduction to the Natura Connect project. It's really just in a nutshell, it's a Horizon Europe project with the title Designing a Resilient and Coherent Trans-European Network of Nature and People. It started back in July 2022 and will last until September 2026. So we have already some outputs to present. The aim of the Natura Connect is to co-develop knowledge, tools, and capacity to support the European countries realizing the EU Biodiversity Strategy 2030 objectives, which is, we might already all know, to extend the land and sea protected areas to up to 30% across Europe, whereas 10% of them should be strictly protected, and to establish the Trans-European Nature Network. The team of Natura Connect is working on modeling and creating maps to prioritize these areas where the extension of protection should be located, where strictly protection could be designated, and also gives models for a blueprint for the Trans-European Nature Network. So the project consortium consists of 17 research institutions across Europe. You have a map here to see where they are located. So it's really across Europe. We have 5 policy and practitioner organizations in 12 different countries across Europe. The project is led by the International Institute for Applied System Analysis, based in Austria, and the co-lead is the Martin Luther University in Germany. So next, I would like to invite you to listen to Harald Egerer. He is the head of the Secretariat of the Carpathian Convention, a convention that focuses on the sustainable development of the mountain area in the green heart of Europe. Harald is leading the Secretariat, which collaborates with 7 countries in the region. Several working groups develop strategies and action plans, contribute to various projects on the topic of large carnivores and connectivity, forests, forestry, pastoralism, sustainable tourism, and more. Now let's hear Harald's perspective on land use changes in the region. Harald, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hildegard, for a kind invitation to speak at this very, very important webinar. And hello, everybody out there. It's really a great honor that I can speak to you. We as Carpathian Convention are, of course, a beneficiary, and we are associated to this very, very important project. And we have long-term partnerships with many of organizations involved, and very much also with the WWF and the WWF Central and Eastern Europe, which is really a long-term partner of ours in many of our endeavors that we are undertaking under the Carpathian Convention. And I will tell you now a little bit more about that, the importance of the Carpathian Convention, of our cooperation, and of course about the importance of the Natura Connect project for us and our stakeholders. Please to the first slide. Yeah, special message on this slide is that we are talking about a very, very important piece of land in Europe, the Carpathian Mountains, which are really Hildegard already said, a green heart of Europe. It's really the last wild areas are in these Carpathian Mountains, beautiful forests, rivers, meadows, one of the European major mountain ecosystems of the size approximately like the Alps, providing essential services to millions of people. We're going to hear more about it, containing many natural and biodiversity jewels. So something very special, bringing together 7 countries: Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, Serbia, Ukraine, and Romania. And this region, for its special nature and culture and social aspects, is protected by the Carpathian Convention since more than 25 years now. The Carpathian Convention is a legal framework, a unique framework of cooperation for this area. And it has, in fact, 2 sides. It has a normative side, so it has protocols and what you should do, what you should not do, like any international treaty protecting something. And then it has another side, also very important, which is catalyzing partnerships, providing synergies, giving really a place to come together and to work together. And we can please go to the next slide. As already said, the contexts are various. It's really a unique ecological and cultural region with people living in these special landscapes. In framework of Natura Connect, it's the place where the Danube Basin meets the Carpathian Mountains, and these two very important ecological regions are intersecting. It's critical from European and global importance for biodiversity and biodiversity protection, and we are working close together, for example, with the Convention on Biological Diversity on the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework that we are translating into the Carpathians. And of course, what is also very special, and I'm not going to mention it more now today because now we are talking about the broader picture and about the EU. But however, what is very important and with us all the time now is the situation in Ukraine, where one of our parties is in a very special situation, unseen to the others. It was like, I don't know, a very strange moment when all of a sudden the normality turned to something completely different, and one of our parties is in a situation of war and invasion. And that implies also on our cooperation, and we have special activities that we are undertaking to keep Ukraine on board of Carpathian Convention, to maintain the level as far as possible of nature protection and different things in Ukraine, and to leave no one behind in this situation. I just wanted to mention this here as well. We go to the next slide, please. Of course, you are all specialists. I don't need to teach you that, but land use is very important for everything. And it's the place where we are living, on which we are living. It's essential for ecosystem services, for flood regulation, in terms of climate change, climate resilience, in terms of the biodiversity protection, and it also um, influences or shapes the identity of the peoples living together in these areas over the history and coming and migrating in and out and so on. We go to the next slide, please. Again, why does this land use topic matter so much for us in the Carpathians? Because at least 17 million people directly depend economically on these landscapes where they're living, is their living space. As already mentioned, also because of the rich biodiversity and all the natural and cultural values that implies and that are connected to the land use. And last not least, the key ecosystem services. And now we are talking not about millions of people, but about hundreds of millions of people who would depend and benefit from the ecosystem services provided by the Carpathian Mountains in terms of water, climate, soils, and so on. We go to the next one, yes. So it's a region at the crossroads. There are many developments going on. So it's a dynamic situation. The decisions in land use today will shape the future. We need to bear in mind, especially in this particularly precious region, the need and the also particularly fragile region in terms of ecosystems, the need for a balanced development and conservation. And this is also what Carpathian Convention and all the projects that we are involved in and with which we are cooperating and from which we are benefiting are here for. Next one, please. Again, very generally, of course, there are many pressures that we are observing from the different countries. One of which we are dealing with, many of you for a lot, is infrastructure pressures, high-level infrastructure from transport roads, railways, but also energy infrastructure. A lot of discussions, for example, around wind parks, new constructions in mountain areas planned or taking place, or hydropower, small hydropower, and so on. So strong pressure from infrastructure. Urban expansion, of course, cities are growing. The agricultural intensification in lowlands, um, and bigger, let's say, bigger exploitations at the expense of smaller ones. A growth in tourism in the mountain areas, observed in all of these countries. Then, of course, also always coming back the topic of logging, wood industry, sometimes sustainable, sometimes unsustainable, and sometimes also illegal. And last not least, amongst also other ones, the topic of land abandonment, conditions becoming harsher for people living in mountain areas, land abandonment with different effects on biodiversity, sometimes positive ones, but also, of course, negative ones, and also negative ones on the culture and on the society. We go on. Next slide. That has also further environmental impacts, land use impacts again on the environment. What is a topic for us, of course, is the habitat fragmentation. Seen that Carpathians so far are hosting, harboring the largest unfragmented areas and forests that we still have in Europe. The loss of biodiversity, again, connected to that, the further degradation of soil due to non or overexploitation, and that again will again impact of what we have said before, the services, and increase the risks of floods, droughts, landslides, amongst others. So we go to the next one. I mentioned this also, we are talking in an international area that is to a large extent part of the EU, but still now still overlapping to accession countries. Always when we talk about shared ecosystems in multiple countries, we have governance challenges. There is a special need for cooperation and coordination transnationally across borders. And also, we have different situations in different countries regarding policies and priorities. But also, of course, that's also an opportunity of experience exchange and learning from each other. Next one. I want now to slowly shift to the opportunities. For of course, what is needed is supporting positive developments to link science, policy, and action. In Carpathians, for example, to support sustainable forestry and the traditional pastoralism, for example, as modes that could positively influence the land use, nature-based solutions. And last not least, also the again all the aspects of transnational cooperation or for entertaining projects like Natura Connect that are very beneficial. We go to the next one, please. As key pathways that we try to a little bit now elaborate in this context, what needs to be done or where we see big opportunities is further integration of land use planning. That is something that in Carpathian Convention in our areas is really essential, and we had a lot of activities in the past and hopefully also in the future. Very good examples of spatial planning, for example, in the transport field, where really big things can be done by improving the spatial planning. And we have in some of our member states, we have very good examples for this. Further linking science, policy, and practice. Then I mentioned already the support to sustainable forestry and close to nature forest management. There are big communities in the Carpathian countries that are promoting enhancing the naturalness of the forest in the Carpathians. Now we are also working with the pastoralist community, for example, of re-establishing the old transhumance roots in Carpathians that can have a very positive impact. Then again on the landscapes and also a cultural thing of identity. Then what we also see is enhanced quality of nature protection or more nature protection if there's no more space for expanding or there can be expansion of areas, but also improving the management and the quality. or preventing the deterioration of it. Now we see that, for example, in Ukraine, where we're starting a big project with 14 national parks in Ukrainian Carpathians to maintain and improve the level of nature protection there. And last but not least, promote nature-based solutions in policies and the interlinkage to climate change. We go to the next one. And I'm coming already to closely to the end, but I wanted to say that transnational collaboration for us is really essential. It's really helping the people in institutions, authorities of ministries, whatever, but also in the scientific field and also in the field of the non-governmental actors and NGOs. This transnational collaboration is essential and is helping and benefiting, I think, a lot of people in the communities. Um, the Carpathian Convention is a platform for also for helping that, and we are happy and proud that we can do that in partnership with many of you. And again, I want to highlight the big significance that we are attributing to the Natura Connect project that is ongoing, and that is for us, I think, very interesting and very beneficial. And I want to come to my last slide, the key takeaway. What I wanted to say is that, of course, for us in Carpathian Convention, we have the challenge, we have the vision that land use change is not only a challenge, as we all know, it's an opportunity to shape a resilient future for people and nature together. And with this, I want to conclude my introduction, and I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you all a very successful webinar. And I want to wish you a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Harald. I think this was a very interesting insight into land use changes and future protections for the Carpathians and for the Carpathian Convention, underlying nature positive developments that we really need to seek to implement, also strengthening transnational and foremost also cross-sectoral cooperation, which we see it's a key. This was also supported by you. So thank you very much. The next thing is that we want to know a little bit more about our audience. So I would like to ask Mari to open a Mentimeter question. So you find in the chat the Mentimeter link, but also you can take the QR code with your phone and join us on Mentimeter. I hope this is working for you. I see people are joining. So do we have already 7 people in there? 8. I see it's growing a little bit. Let's wait a little bit before we start with the first question. It's always good because in Zoom meetings we cannot see much of each other and we cannot hear much of each other. So I think it's always nice to see who we are and where we come from. So yeah, maybe let's open the first question. So where are you joining from today? This would be my first question. Oh, I see. We are across Europe. This is fine because it was. Okay. That's nice to see that we are across Europe, not only in the Danube Carpathian region. So let's wait for 2 more answers, perhaps. And then, Andreas, you are in Brasov today. Greetings. Good. Okay, then I think we can take the next question. We would like to know a little bit about your expertise or background. So are you working for conservation, for biodiversity, for finance and impact, for agriculture, forestry and fisheries, so land use, other, okay, use and civil society. I see. Two people are working in agriculture, forestry, fisheries. We have also working in the conservation policy. Okay. Nobody from the climate policy, which would have been interesting, but let's see. Landscape or regional planning, very good. But most of us are from the conservation policy and biodiversity. Um, okay, so we have an impression who we are today, what makes our group. The next thing is I would like to introduce you to Camille Venier-Camon. She is working at the Vrije University in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. She is a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Environmental Studies, and she uses spatial land use modeling to help explore different potential pathways to sustainable futures. For instance, looking at the way that different land use policies and regional planning efforts change the challenges or trade-offs that we are faced with. Her current work focuses on the way that environmental values may be translated into different policy assumptions and how this might affect land use outcomes. This is what she will tell you more about today, but first she has some questions to you. So perhaps we can open the next.
Thanks a lot,
Camille?
Hildegard,
Mhm.
for the nice introduction. I want to start with some questions just to kind of get us thinking along these lines of values of nature and how we imagine policies emerging from those values. So I know that at a local or maybe a personal level, yeah, land can have a lot of different values at once, or we can care about a lot of different things about it, or have a lot, yeah, multiple relationships with it. But I want to kind of get a sense of yeah, just in your mind, what is the goal of conservation? We've already heard from Harold a lot of the benefits that come from nature, especially in the Carpathian Danube region. But let's see if we can kind of distill some key aspects that we want conservation to do for us. Are we caring about species? Is it, yeah, functioning ecosystems or ecosystem health? Maybe the services that come from ecosystem sustainability, so that, like, I guess the longevity of these functioning ecosystems. Yeah, very nice. Balanced development and conservation, so bringing some human or social aspects. Um, Pollination, yeah, linking back to the different ecosystem services that can bring benefits to society. Um, Resilience, yeah, and species again. So for species, I'm going to read this as maybe the intrinsic value, their right to also a safe and healthy environment to live within. Farmland biodiversity, so not just functioning ecosystems, but also functioning agroecological spaces. Coexistence, yeah, that's a nice one. That we exist on the landscape and the landscape exists with us in it. So to try and find a balance in between. Um, nice. Um, yeah, I think we're thinking on more or less the same lines. We haven't, and not everybody has answered, but maybe we can already move on to the next question. So if these are the values that we gain from nature, what kind of policies would help to support this goal? And this is where it gets a little bit tricky because, as I said, at a local or a personal level, you can have all of these values at once. But when we try and zoom out and imagine a policy at a more regional level, it tends to require a bit of abstraction or simplification or generalization. What does this look like in terms of land use planning? Yeah, conservation is treated as a spatial problem often, where we kind of designate areas as maybe higher priority or maybe particularly important for providing certain kinds of services, and then spatial plans tend to emerge from this. So we already have integration of conservation into spatial planning. Yes. And what does that mean? Are we setting land aside for nature and limiting human uses in those areas, or are we changing maybe our agricultural practices in order to have a softer edge in between natural and human systems? Obligate cross-sectoral cooperation. Okay, so more harmonization, I suppose, in between probably agricultural, forestry, conservation policies. Yeah, because sometimes these things can work against one another. Um, uh, Environmental schemes, nature restoration law. Yeah, non-contradictory, mainstreamed, enforceable. Okay, so yeah, trying to find again greater alignment, it sounds like in between different land use strategies that all serve towards biodiversity outcomes. Local entrepreneurs. Nice. I like how um protected area expansion has not come up at all so far, which I find quite interesting. Um yeah, so people are much more focused, it seems, on the way nature is managed within human landscapes, which is also quite nice to see. Mainstreaming biodiversity into all policies. Yeah, quite interesting. I don't know if we want to give a minute just for a few more water retention measures. Nice. So thinking more specifically, maybe around river management strategies, local communities. And support as well. I like that because it kind of I think in a lot of the times in these, especially in regional or larger scale economic or development policies, I think that there can be yeah, communities maybe in more rural or peripheral areas can often can have a hard time tapping into maybe the benefits of policies or evading the pressures that come with agricultural or economic changes. So actively targeting communities for environmental health can also be really important. Okay. Yeah, I suppose we can go to the next one. Maybe that's what people have. Um, so what does this mean for broader landscape transformation? So far, people have been giving policies that are a little bit abstract or ideas that are kind of focused on local communities and local land use practices. So if we're going to imagine what kind of landscape changes might happen at a European scale in order to support um, um, these goals or values or kind of enact these policies. Yeah, we had nature restoration law mentioned. We had yeah, support for local communities or kind of responsible agriculture. What are we imagining? Um, yeah, how could this look at a landscape scale, at a regional landscape scale? It's difficult to imagine. Uh, yeah, especially when I imagine so many of you are probably working with a specific region or with a specific community or landscape. It might be tricky. And this is the challenge. Moving up in scale requires a certain amount of uh, yeah, translation or abstraction of these values. But this also goes the other direction of once we have these regional policies and regional land use projections, which is more what I do. It can be also really difficult to translate it back down to something that's locally meaningful. So effectively halting biodiversity loss, including the corruption behind it. Excellent. Um, if we imagine maps changing, what might this look for or look like? More efforts to look beyond your own horizon. Very nice. So we're really dealing with the human factor here and the kind of societal conflict management. Nice. So I imagine this could mean a lot of things. But yeah, my first thought is that this might mean conflict between the trade-offs in between, for example, agricultural production and ecosystem management, maybe. Different views on land use, better understanding between politicians and stakeholders. These are all really excellent, guys. How do we imagine yeah, for lands so this I suppose brings it into a management rather than a land use perspective, which I think is also quite probably useful. One of my main challenges, I'm not often able to look at specific management in specific areas or to know what stakeholders or what specific needs are going on. So I tend to, um, okay, restoration of ecosystems. This is starting to get a bit spatial. Now we can imagine nature expansion in probably areas that are really important for species or important for ecosystem services, long-term planning across borders. That also speaks to yeah, these regional planning efforts because the model is broken into regions rather than countries. It sort of imagines yeah, Europe as a broader bucket that we can kind of optimize land use in. I'll talk a little bit more about the modeling later. A balanced human-nature relationships. Okay. Um, can we scroll down there? I think there's some that we haven't read yet. Different. Oh no, that one did come up already. Yeah.
Maybe we can take the next slide because time
Yep.
is okay.
Okay, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. I want to keep driving in this spatial direction, in this land use direction. What does this mean specifically? And you can think about what's maybe more appropriate in your area. When we try and translate these values or these, it can be kind of difficult to imagine what conflict resolution means to you or what it looks like on the land. But because ecosystems and landscapes are ultimately about land, and land is yeah, the medium that connects values and policies and impacts and outcomes. And um, this is kind of the scale that we're looking at here. Okay, so ecosystem services, restoration of wilderness. So here I'm kind of wilderness. I'm kind of using to capture this idea that there's a nature that is not affected by human land use activities, and that it can kind of be maybe a little bit separate from human land use versus shared cultural landscapes is kind of like the opposite end of the spectrum, where we're imagining these very integrated or heterogeneous, kind of like mixed multifunctional landscapes that have some trees or patches of habitat, but also maybe artisanal or heritage land use practices taking place. And then ecosystem services is kind of, yeah, managing landscapes specifically for certain benefits that are really important. Pollination was already mentioned. I imagine, yeah, watershed management or water purification, maintenance of healthy soils, these kinds of things. Um, Very nice. Okay, so they're not quite all on par, but we can see that they're all important. All right, so maybe is that the last question?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe I can go ahead and share my screen. I also have a bit of a presentation here for you where I will talk a little bit more about the modeling side of things and some of the challenges in trying to capture or represent um, these values and what kind of futures they might lead to. So I suppose oh, is it going to? There we are. Um,
Perfect. We can.
So yes, I'm as Hildegard mentioned, a part of the Natura Connect, where there's a lot of focus on the regional planning efforts, specifically with the expansion of the 10N network. So how might we explore different planning strategies for expanding the protected area network across Europe? we kind of start a little bit upstream and go start by asking what values it is that we're trying to support. Which again, there's this challenge of abstraction. How do you simplify these many plural and overlapping values into a simple policy tool? So I want to yeah, maybe back up a little bit and kind of talk about an existing conversation that takes or has been taking place for decades, really, in conservation and also land use science or land system science. And it could kind of be split into or taken as a bit of a debate, I suppose. Um, Biodiversity conservation sort of emerged under this paradigm of wilderness protection, where land was set aside from people and kind of kept people free to an extent. And this kind of found an analogy in the land sparing debate. So it says that if we kind of make our human land uses, our agricultural or urban practices more dense and more efficient, we can set more land aside for nature, and this is what we need for future sustainability. And on the other side of the debate, you have people saying, hang on, we have a long history of kind of small scale agroecological or heritage land uses. People live on the landscape and you can't just displace everybody for wilderness. So what we should do instead is to have these to support kind of like small scale mixed multifunctional landscapes that support some biodiversity and some human settlement and some production and to have more of a land sharing approach. And so these kind of exist on a bit of a spectrum, ultimately holding different values at the core of their arguments. Also, more recently, you have conservation planning taking ecosystem services into account. So now certain models are yeah, finding priority areas for species, yeah, whether it's species richness or threatened species, but also certain services that are important for future sustainability. So the three of these have kind of been oriented around a triangle within the Natura Connect community, I suppose, where these provide ultimately three potential pathways of meeting our future sustainability goals. We could plan a future Europe that maximizes any one of these values. We could plan a Europe that maximizes the total extent of nature, where the rest of human land use is made more dense and probably more continuous. We might have patches of agricultural landscape, for example, that is maybe less friendly to biodiversity and maybe more focused on kind of efficient mechanization, but this leaves more room for wilderness areas. Or we could plan a future Europe where we focus on maximizing the access that people have to nature, really focusing on expanding these mosaic or peri-urban landscapes, making cities less dense, bringing nature and human elements together as much as possible. Or we could plan a future Europe where we maximize the kind of efficient delivery of ecosystem services to the areas where they're most needed. Maybe making sure that there's patches of habitat next to agricultural systems to make sure that there's yeah, room for pollinators and natural pests, things like this, to make our yeah, production more sustainable. So what I do is I use a spatially explicit land system model, where I kind of create an all else being equal environment by making the center of the triangle following just a generally sustainability oriented pathway future. So I follow, for anybody who's familiar with the SSPs, the shared socioeconomic pathway forward, where projections have been made around the amount of crop production or population growth that yeah, follow a more sustainable trajectory. So it's quite friendly demands, and it allows us to explore, okay, if we yeah, don't have crazy production or reliance on biofuels, how could we then organize landscapes to meet these goals? Or how do these values then translate into land use outcomes? And it just allows us to compare the values and the impacts of the values, or the impacts of the policies that we simulate in the model, to see what these differences might be. So specifically, I also, for all of them, for all of these three futures that I then model, all of them have basically the same demands, including, following the nature restoration law, demands for wetland restoration, demands for tree planting. We simulate planting 3 billion trees. Well, I need to check my parameters now. Planting trees by 2030, and the model ultimately runs until 2050. So it is a long-term projection. Also, certain policies like wetlands and primary forests are not able to convert. So all of our storylines are generally sustainability focused and nature restoration focused. But then we change our assumptions, or the way that these policies play out. So for nature, where we're focused on wilderness expansion, we're trying to cluster forests together, cluster agriculture together. I set a preference against low intensity systems to try and simulate this land sparing approach. For nature as culture, we do the opposite. We're trying to suppress high intensity agricultural systems, encourage the expansion of mosaics, and cluster different kinds of land uses together, cluster forests with mosaics and with peri-urban, to try and bring people into contact with these multifunctional landscapes. And then nature for society, we're trying to, again, kind of focus on efficiency and suppress low intensity systems, but bring combined objective forests that supply multiple types of benefits in contact with productive systems. Still kind of trying to reduce the urban footprint. And then mosaics are also slightly preferred, but not like nature as culture. Let me know if I'm going too fast at all. So to kind of visualize this, when we imagine what this means at a landscape scale, this is just an example south of Bucharest, and you can kind of see nature for nature. We have this clumping of the dark green forests in the south, these kind of larger patches of forest that probably support more species, or more kind of natural ecosystem processes. They're less fragmented. But it also leads to a continuous extent of these. The orange is a medium intensity agricultural system. So this is quite continuous, and probably there's a lot of area where biodiversity is not able to exist. Nature for society in the middle. The forest starts to be a little bit more fragmented, and we're bringing patches of forest up into this agricultural matrix. And this makes sure that agriculture is more exposed to ecosystem services like pollination, natural pest control, soil health, these kinds of things, especially around the river, where it can kind of help with some riparian processes as well. The teal around the edges of the forest, these are those mosaic landscapes. This is starting to blend. Mosaic is, these are 1 kilometer squared pixels, by the way. So a mosaic is within that pixel, you have a certain amount of trees and agriculture and human settlements. So it's a little bit more blended and more multifunctional at a smaller scale than what a normal pixel would be able to identify as. And then on the right-hand side, nature is culture. We're really imagining, we're trying to expand these mosaics, that kind of like teal, blue, green. And it does contract there's a trade-off with the amount of just a patch of forest, how big a patch of forest might be. It starts to be not quite as scattered as nature for society, where you still have this efficiency focus, but you have an expansion of these mixed multifunctional landscapes. The kind of khaki green is a combined objective forest, where the dark green is a close to nature forest. But interestingly, we also see this really dark orange in the corner. This is where agriculture has to intensify in order to balance our projected crop production demands. So the low intensity and the mosaic systems provide less crops than a medium or a high intensity kind of monoculture landscape. And so expanding these low intensity landscapes, even though it gives us more of what we want in terms of connection between people and landscapes and connection between people and their food systems, it does require a little bit of targeted intensification in order to balance. So at a regional scale, if we kind of take a step back and look at this at a European scale, this is the other thing with land use scenarios. It helps us inform regional policies. We can look at how these different futures maybe create different trade-offs, or maybe there's areas that are important for all of them, and this can kind of help us create a proposal for how the 10N network should expand. But in doing so, it needs to simplify Europe. We only have 17 different land system classes. We're not really able to consider management practices within each class. We can kind of only consider the identity. So there is a simplification and an abstraction here. But ultimately, yeah, it does help us look at different how different policies could play out at a larger scale like this, and what kind of changes might take place in certain areas. I think somewhere it was mentioned to look beyond borders, or to look at transnational outcomes, and a large scale does also helps us imagine this. If we're trying to plant billions of trees across Europe, how and where might this take place, or where are the tensions or the trade-offs with maybe agriculture or different needs most acute, or which areas are going to be more responsible for nature restoration. We can kind of ask these kinds of large-scale questions. So just to take you through the legend real quick, the gray are the urban systems, the black is the dense cities, the blue is wetlands. Again, the teal kind of light, blue-green are the mosaics, these low-intensity mixed multifunctional systems. The orange are different cropland intensities. The pink are different grasslands. So this is for livestock production, again with different intensities. Purple is permanent cropland, and then the greens are our forests. So the dark green is our primary or close to nature forest. The khaki combined objective forests, and then the light green is the plantation forest for timber production. And then the water and ice and bare rock and shrub, those classes don't change. So for nature, we can see again these kind of continuous networks or continuous expanses of nature, particularly in mountain areas. And this does lead to also continuous patches of agriculture, kind of in between these forested areas quite often. There is some areas that have a little bit of both going on, particularly with the combined objective forest. But in general, we see that there's a bit of a land sparing effect that we've been able to simulate. We can contrast this with the other futures. This is nature for society. So immediately you see less dark green. So there's more of a focus on the combined objective forestry, because we can get multiple benefits out of this. It's not just for species anymore. That's also for societal needs. And a little bit hard to see from this zoomed out perspective. We'll zoom in a little bit here. But there's also more scattering or checkerboarding in between agricultural and combined objective systems. And then nature is culture. You can see how we're trying to maximize this blue-green teal-ish color, but that this also does require quite some targeted intensification in order to balance. So we bring more people into contact with healthy food systems, biodiverse, heterogeneous landscapes, but certain areas, because we exist in this, all else being equal. So under this kind of SSP1 universe where demands are held constant, if we don't change our demands, then we also need to intensify a bit of production, which is a little bit interesting because we kind of expected the opposite with the land sparing needing to have intensification, but the land sparing also yeah, expands these low intensity systems to the degree where we need to balance. So if we look at the types of changes that are taking place, nature for nature. Oh, sorry, I forgot to correct this. I was going to have the full name. So N is nature for nature. We're looking at a lot of transitions from mosaics or plantations to natural systems alongside forest maturation. So we're, yeah, expanding. This is maybe active or passive restoration. Again, I can't really look at the management practices or like whether it's rewilding or abandonment. We're not really sure. We just know that nature is expanding under this future to quite a degree. And then we have a little bit of productive to mosaics taking place, a little bit of cropland intensification. But for the most part, it's by and large the expansion and the aging of forests. Nature for society. It's a little bit more balanced. We have some shifts from mosaic systems or plantations to forests, definitely less maturation into close to nature or primary forests, again, because we want to maintain those combined objective forests. There's a bit more productive to forests in certain areas. We can kind of see up in Denmark because of yeah, the way agriculture is balanced in that region. And then we also have more productive to mosaics. So it just, yeah, more processes taking place, a little bit more balanced. But we do still have some forest maturation. It's quite dark and maybe difficult to see, but. And then nature is culture. Again, the cropland intensification is maybe a bit loudest because of the color coding here. But if we, yeah, really try and focus, and I apologize, it's a little difficult to see the green on this gray, but we have much more productive to mosaics, a little bit more scattered. So it's not as clumped, it's not as easy to kind of like pick out specific regions where things are taking place, but kind of across the board in a much more yeah, scattered sense. We have a lot of productive to mosaics. We have less mosaic or plantation to nature, less forest maturation, a bit more productive to forest, maybe comparable to nature for society. But yeah, basically the point of all of this to say is to say that the value that we hold of nature, or what we imagine the purpose of conservation can have wildly different effects on landscapes through the policies that this stimulates. So to try and bring some awareness into that. I'm not sure if it's easier to see these differences. Yeah, another kind of key takeaway that we're landing on here is that whatever we do to forests or whatever conservation means in our future has a huge impact on the way agriculture is practiced. So nature for nature forests, we can see this clumping. Nature for nature agriculture, we see a similar kind of clumping and patchiness to it. Versus nature for society forests, it's a little bit more scattered, and we can kind of see a similar yeah, breaking up of the pixels within nature for society, and also a little bit more focus on these mosaics that are bringing benefits into agricultural landscapes. And then nature is culture is even more scattered, and you can really see the expansion of these mosaic systems trying to bring these yeah, low intensity systems and people together in a for sustainable agriculture. But we really also lose those large tracts of intact kind of what would be wilderness areas, I suppose. So yeah, if we zoom in on the Carpathian region, we can kind of get a better look of what this might take place. So I have the black box up in the left-hand corner here, kind of showing where this is, and you do see the differences in forest strategies and the way this interacts with agricultural strategies. So for the top, we have nature for nature. We have a lot of aging into old growth forests along the mountain chain, and then these kind of continuous basins of agricultural land use. Nature for society on the right, more of a focus on combined objective forests, more kind of slightly more checkerboarding of forests in agricultural landscapes. And then nature as culture on the right, there is quite some intensification that takes place, but then also expansion of these low intensity, the teal systems around the edges of the forest and kind of bringing forest into agricultural landscapes. And again, just taking a look at the types of transitions. I'm not sure if I'm repeating myself too much here, but again, you can kind of see the patchiness and the aging in nature for nature, the scattered planting of trees and creating patches of habitat in agricultural systems in nature for society, and then mostly productive to mosaics in nature's culture. Again, it's the light green, it's a little bit harder to see, so it doesn't look as dramatic as the other two. But we yeah, can expand those multifunctional landscapes. So the key takeaways that I want to kind of highlight here, yeah, the way we value nature shapes how we imagine sustainable land use. And a lot of the times these values are maybe implicit or taken for granted, or it can be difficult to kind of like make explicit this connection in between the value and what we imagine taking place at a landscape scale. We kind of saw earlier with the Mentimeter how, yeah, very few responses were a clear land use policy, even when this is maybe at at a European scale, what policymakers are trying to make decisions around. So connecting these, making values explicit, and really trying to be clear about what this assumption means at a large regional landscape yeah, scale. Then we can start to look at, okay, is this what does this mean for a regional context? Do these values or do these assumptions hold? Are there trade-offs here? Maybe a certain strategy would be too disruptive to what already exists, or kind of like the local values. It can kind of, yeah, be a bit of a conversation starter for connecting large-scale policymakers with local outcomes. Yeah, the second key takeaway that I really wanted to drive home was that the way we manage forests, a lot of the times, especially from a conservation perspective, we're focused a lot on nature, on species, on ecosystem restoration, and a little bit less focused on what this means for other sectors. So again, earlier in the Mentimeter, we had a lot of people kind of commenting on the need for harmonization in between sectors and sector policies. So yeah, the way we manage agricultural landscapes is hugely connected to the way we manage natural landscapes, and how these assumptions, yeah, making values explicit can kind of help us clarify what it is that we're imagining for both of these sectors. Scenario modeling, yeah, as I've shown, can be used to explore different potential futures. I ran simulations at a European scale, which requires a certain amount of abstraction and simplification in terms of the land uses considered, the inability to look at land management within each of these pixels. But scenario modeling can also be done at a local scale. So it can be hugely helpful for example, if you have a regional policy that needs to take place, to get different stakeholders together and to kind of cooperatively develop your own storylines that can then be modeled at that scale, kind of thing. So we started with three already quite clear storylines about values with nature that were established by the IPBES and used in Nature Connect more broadly. But at the local scale, it is possible to kind of do this in an integrated, participatory, and kind of democratic way to to make these values and land use needs explicit, to make sure that that the policies and the futures that are built around them are yeah, appropriate and kind of fit for context. Yeah, so the purpose of the scenario will determine what scale, resolution, classification of the model, and how these policies are kind of parameterized in the model. But then it can, yeah. So the question will determine, I guess, the modeling environment. But yeah, I guess I hope that I kind of showed what is possible or how this can kind of take place. So that's it from my end. Thanks a lot for listening. I'll hand it back over to Hildegard, and I
Yeah,
hope I didn't.
thank
Oh, I did go a little bit over time. I
yeah.
apologize for that.
Camille, thank you very much for the insights of scientific work on land use changes and assumptions behind and storylines behind them. We can take maybe one question by Andreas. He's asking, is climate change factored into these scenarios?
Yeah, so because we model them all on the same baseline, and we're following a sustainability oriented baseline, we follow the RPC 2.6, if that makes sense to you. So we follow like a friendly climate scenario. There are also other scenarios that are more like the shared socioeconomic pathways is more of like a family of scenarios, and they have more dystopian or more business as usual as well that can kind of be used to contrast. And actually, I forgot to include that in my slides to kind of show the difference in between these positive futures and what some more negative futures might look like. And they consider, yeah, more climate projections that are more in line with that socioeconomic storyline. So they are factored into the way, yeah, land use, or mostly in terms of determining where certain land uses will be possible or appropriate kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you, Camille. I don't know, Harald, he writes very interesting, particular regarding further territorial segregation in the meaning different policies can and will be applied to different parts of the land. E.g., in some areas we focus on the protection of very precious old growth forests. In other areas, monocultures can be turned into more multifunctional landscapes. So the question, could I become a mix of the different scenarios? Could it become a mix of the different scenarios?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because we can also see like a lot of my work also focuses on a justice aspect as well, where I'm kind of looking at the different yeah, because people live everywhere on the landscape, and so if there's a lot of restoration bringing a lot of benefits and healthy ecosystems to certain areas, and then other areas, in order to make like this broader European balance met, certain areas might be left with a lot of intensification that brings maybe some yeah, more pollution or disservices to certain people. So you get to start to explore yeah, the spatial trade-offs and the spatial assumptions and what areas might be left behind in certain restoration scenarios or positive futures. There might still be some areas that are not so positive. So breaking that up and kind of compartmentalizing, and it would be interesting. I wouldn't necessarily know how to do it within this modeling framework, but to see if you could have more of a regional balance, or to say like this future is more appropriate in this area versus this future is more appropriate in that area. I think you would need a collection of smaller models. Yeah, multi-scalar ensemble modeling is a thing, but I think it's a bit more complicated and a bit outside of my expertise. But presumably that would be a way to try and tie local needs in every area to this broader, more regional target. Um, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thanks for the questions. I think they are very interesting. Due to the time constraints, I think we will leave out the second Mentimeter questions because we promised to finish in 5 minutes. And I think in 5 minutes we cannot answer them. But I think we got already in the first Mentimeter quite some good insights of people's opinions about land use changes and what to include and what would be most appropriate and necessary for developing in a nature positive way. So I would like to wrap up our webinar. And would like to say that the Nature Futures framework land use models look at how European landscape could look like in future when implementing the EU biodiversity strategy and specifically the Trans-European Nature Network, while also satisfying demands in timber, food and other production with demography. Land use changes are a hot topic in the region since the intensification and agricultural forestry practices have a big influence on biodiversity in the region, but not only. In addition, the extension of settlements and transport infrastructure lead to fragmentation of ecosystems and cause barriers for wildlife. Ecosystem services might be at risk and climate change is making it worse. So if we want to sustainably develop the region, we need to shift from a business as usual acting in silos to a nature positive thinking and acting, including nature in all sectors, as described by Camille's scenarios. They are all nature positive, and I think this is the way we need to go. We need to go forward. Also to meet the needs of the EU biodiversity strategy and the nature restoration law. What does this mean to develop nature for society, integrating natural processes in our environment, for example, sustainable agriculture, interwoven with settlements, or where do we emphasize nature for culture to, for example, protect mosaic landscapes or holy places? What are the trade-offs if we go into one direction or another? We need to go away from business as usual and mainstream nature in all of our future plans and activities. And I hope this seminar gave you some inspirations for your work. And thanks Harald and Camille for the nice introductory words, and for Camille for this very sophisticated science behind it, and for the active participation of our audience. What I wanted to add here still is that I would like to announce the next steps. So the recording and the presentations and the post-workshop briefing will be made accessible on the Natura Connect website, and you will get you will be informed. And I only want to draw your attention to check out the Natura Connect learning platform, where I put the link in. Here you can also learn more about land use changes and also climate change scenarios. It's a free available learning platform with 3 different topics on concepts, on governance, and on tools, where you can explore our tools that have been developed in Natura Connect, and also there is a way how to use it in your environment. Then we will publish the Natura Connector, which is a decision support tool. This will come very soon, where all the maps that have been developed, the most important ones, will be displayed, and you can zoom in to a very 1 square kilometer level. And the baseline of our work are data. So scientists are working heavily on different data sets, and all these data produced by the Natura Connect project will be available at Zenodo. So this is what I wanted to tell you, so that you also find some access to ours. And towards the end, I would like to ask you to evaluate this webinar. It will help us to improve next time, or we'll see how you perceived our webinar. So the QR code is here. If you take your short time to answer, I think it's 5 questions, is not too much, but we would be happy to receive some feedback from you on this webinar. And yeah, thanks for joining us today. And I'm really looking forward to using these results in our upcoming projects, like in the Natura, like in the Carpathians Life project that is in the pipeline at the moment, or in other activities and initiatives, for example, also from our side, from WWF Central and Eastern Europe. So thank you very much for joining, and yeah, see you soon, maybe perhaps in another context.
Thanks a lot, everyone.